right before this interview in my
Yeah,
car are a
yeah.
thousand albums. This record store that I pick up records on Wednesday night, I picked them up last night, and he emails me today. I got more records for you. He said I got a cart. So I thought four boxes. It was a massive cart, and there's a thousand albums in my car. Like,
Wow.
yeah, and like the swing era and classical music here, and box sets, and I can't see him throw them out, so I rescue them.
Good for you.
I
Good
mean,
for you.
it's what we do.
I hear you, but I got to tell you, 1,000 albums a an awkward, cumbersome thing to inherit. No question about it. You
Around the,
got to store them. You got to file them alphabetically. You got to take them in and out of the sleeves.
I get 50,000 of them from this guy. I've got,
Really?
I pay more in storage than I pay in rent.
Yeah, well, this is my point exactly.
Exactly.
It's a
And
burden. It's a blessing and a burden.
well, these are going over to my business partner's house about a mile up the road because I'm not taking them to my storage. There's too many in my car. So I'll just unload them into the garage and, hey, uh, my significant other and I will figure a way to sell them on eBay or whatever. That's the plan.
Yeah.
But great to see you again.
Always a pleasure to see you, Joe.
I'm glad our first show went so well. People liked it.
It's hard to imagine, but there you go.
Eh,
People like it.
Well, you never know if they like the conversation, um, and they liked our conversation, so I wanted to continue it. And
Mhm.
I'll leave the floor to you. What would you like to talk about?
Started at Mercury, went to Electra, came back to Mercury. Kind of a big full circle.
And in that circle, the industry kept changing
Yes,
dramatically.
it did. Yes, it did. Um, One of the worst aspects of the industry, as it was then, was its infatuation with its own musical chairs. Who's in, who's out, who's up, who's down. There were magazines devoted to that. Hits magazine, that was their bread and butter to publish rumors about who was going to be fired, who was going to be hired, who's getting promoted, who's on the outs. And it was not a healthy thing for the industry. I suppose it's not healthy in any industry, but the record business or show business in general seems to really embrace those sorts of antics, and it's not good for business.
Now you've got Spotify with everyone on Spotify, and it's a jungle.
Well, that's okay. That's another issue. That's what happened when gatekeepers became passe. I used to be asked onto I may have said this in part one, I don't know. I would be asked onto the A&R panels at the New Music Seminar or at South by Southwest. And inevitably, some kid in the audience would say, well, you know, uh, why do you think you should be the one that decides who gets to record and who doesn't? And the answer is because without guys like me, there would be a tsunami of music that no one would be able to put their arms around or comprehend or um, deal with. It would be chaos, and to some extent today, what you do have is chaos. You have other ways of sorting it out and highlighting what's ostensibly good from what isn't. But it's certainly not as orderly, for better or for worse.
Well, take a legacy artist like Elliot, since I just talked to him. He's
Hmm.
playing Spain in 2 weeks and sold out already. So
Yeah,
Japan and Spain, he's big, and um, he's got those 52 albums to cull the music from, but he's got his audience. So I asked, are you taping all the shows? He said, yes, I've got fans that go around and tape all my concerts. So I said, do what John Pousette Dart does, put them up on the web. Because Elliot says, I don't have the time to listen to them because I want to do a live album, but I don't want to listen to all. I said, put them up on the website. Let your fans dictate what their favorite tracks are. He loved it.
Hmm. Hmm.
So
Well, that's the beauty of, now we have crowdsourcing, uh, or even a crowd curating to take the place of what used to be curators that were, professional curators at record labels or whatever. Um, uh, Taping has always been a wonderful boon to artists, starting way back. Certainly the Grateful Dead. That was what immortalized them.
you can go on there's that free site, and the Dead let people put audience tapes,
Hmm.
not soundboards, but audience tapes. So you can
Right.
go through a whole array of stuff and put your own albums together with all the free stuff out there.
Oh, and people do, same with Fish,
Yep.
same with,
Yeah.
I mean, and Springsteen, uh, people. I'll tell you something funny about the Grateful Dead. So when I was in college, I think I went to a show, and it was in an outdoor raceway in Hartford, Connecticut, Dillon Stadium, I think it's called. And many, many, many years later, I had a guitar tech, amp tech friend of mine who was a Deadhead, and so casually one day I say, "Oh, I've seen the Grateful Dead a lot of times." One time I saw him at this raceway in Hartford, and the guy, he went to Dillon Stadium in '77 or whatever it was. And I said, "Yeah, yeah, that'd be right." And he said, "Do you realize that's considered the third greatest Grateful Dead show ever in the history of the Dead? Ever?" He was so jealous that I'd been to this show. But that's how, um, deeply schooled Deadheads are in Deadhead mythology. You know, he knew the details. I saw them at the Yale Bowl in about 1970, and he knew which guitar Jerry Garcia played at that show, which happened to be a Guild S100. He knew. I didn't know.
Kind of
Uh,
insane if you think about it.
it's
I,
what
insane if you think about it. Yeah.
it borders on it, sure, especially because you're talking about Grateful Dead music, but that's a different discussion for another day.
So he must have known the concerts you went to by heart for listening to the tapes.
Yeah. And from Deadheads talking to Deadheads about legendary things, that happened with the dead. So,
I appreciate them, but you know, I liked what I liked, and the Dead wasn't part of that.
I
It's
think that's you and many, many others.
yeah. But what are you doing these days? Are you doing anything musical?
If I turned the camera around, you'd see nothing but gear and instruments and so forth. But in answer to your question, whenever an artist or a publisher or a label, whoever rings me up and says, "Hey, I have this situation or this set of demos," or would you consider listening to them and giving me an opinion? I do that.
That's fantastic.
Well, I don't have the heart to say no. So,
Yeah. But
sometimes I want to.
well, that your opinion matters.
It's very it's humbling, and it's very edifying that people still think that sometimes. Yeah.
Now, in the previous show, I saw all the gear. So, how many instruments do you play?
Well, how many instruments do I play badly? All of them.
Okay.
Well, I play the guitar, and I therefore I can work my way around a bass guitar, and I play the drums, and I taught myself how to play the piano when I was a child. So I'm self-schooled and pretty lame. And I did have to. I got drafted into the school band. I wanted to, of course, be in the percussion section, but they had too many percussionists. So the music teacher took me aside and said, I want you to learn how to play the saxophone. I don't have enough sax players." So I did have to learn the alto saxophone, which uh, which was a burden because I had to drag it back and forth from school every day, and that thing was heavy. Um, take it home to practice, bring it back for lessons. And anyway, uh, there was a time I knew how to play the saxophone.
So do you record at home?
Yeah, occasionally, sometimes for my own amusement, sometimes to demonstrate what I'm thinking to someone else.
Ah,
But it's your basic Pro Logic rig, and I don't do anything that sophisticated with it.
we talked a lot about Frank Black and the Pixies and Gene, um, the Boston area
Yeah.
bands.
Yeah.
W- Um, but there was more to your story that we didn't get to. We kind of veered off to the Boston thing because I'm from Boston.
Right.
But was it more of the Mercury stuff we want to talk about and after Electra?
Well, okay. I think we hopscotched through Mercury. We didn't touch on uh, Robert Cray. We did touch on the Rainmakers, and I mentioned to you maybe in some other taping that fans of the Rainmakers were so thrilled that I told a story about them and their demos, and it got posted on Facebook, and it went viral as far as Rainmaker fans are concerned. So, but we didn't talk about the Everly Brothers, uh, Michelle Schacht. Uh,
What went on with Michelle Shocked? How did you? What was a demo presented to you?
Michelle Schacht is an interesting story. She, she gained notoriety by appearing at the Kerrville Folk Festival in Texas, and she was noticed by a guy named Pete Lawrence. She was noticed when she gave a performance, and he was very taken with her. And he asked her if she would, come to an isolated part of the festival and sit down with her guitar and play some songs into his cassette recorder. So she complied, and he made a tape which he brought back to England where he lived. And the tape, he was so enamored of this tape, he somehow got it to the disc jockey, uh, to a prominent disc jockey in the UK, who also fell in love with it and started playing it on the air. That caused the label Cooking Vinyl to want to press it up, and so it became an album called the Texas Campfire Tapes. And that became something of a sensation. Now, it was just Michelle and her guitar, uh, surrounded by the sound of crickets and trucks rolling by and so forth, because that's what was going on when she recorded it. So this became an item. My involvement happened um, for two reasons. Um, well, the first is I used to listen to there was a disc jockey in New York named Vin Scelsa, and Vin Scelsa had a Sunday morning show which may have been called Idiot's Delight at the time. It was on WNEW, FM, and uh, he would wax effusive about whatever thing was thrilling him that week, and he played records, and I would always listen on Sunday morning. I sort of would take a morning shower and a shave, and while all this was going on, I'd have Vin Scelsa talking to me about whatever was on his mind. So one Sunday morning, what was on his mind was the Texas Campfire tapes. So he started telling this story that I just told you about her playing by the campfire with the crickets and the trucks rolling by. And it's a very intriguing story. So I was glued to the thing. And in my head, I'm thinking, well, there's nothing like a good backstory to help promote a new artist or whatever. And so I'm kind of, into the idea that maybe this is something to look into. And he finally gets around to playing one of the tracks from the record, and I think, uh, I don't know, that's not that great. I don't know. And so I was a bit dismissive of Michelle. Meanwhile, my assistant at the record label, um, a woman named Sue Drew, she also encountered the Texas Campfire tapes, and she thought highly of them. And so she came to me one day and said, "Oh, have you heard this Michelle Schacht?" And I said, "Matter of fact, I did. I wasn't that taken." And she said, "Oh, I don't know." So the the owner of Cooking Vinyl Records made a trip to New York, and he was making the rounds of the labels, I guess, promoting the idea of Michelle Schacht. And when he called my office, my assistant Sue was eager to set up a meeting between me and Martin Goldschmidt. And so she did. And one day Martin shows up. And I guess I was feeling rather effusive that day and convivial, and I was in a good mood. And I guess in an effort to humor Martin more than anything else, because I thought this is probably not for me. I said, you know what? I really want to see her perform. I really, really want to. So wherever she's performing next, and I figured that would be down at the Lone Star Cafe on Thursday night or something, wherever she is next, I'll be there to see her play. And he said, "Oh, that's marvelous. Then you'll be at South Bank in London on the 14th." And I kind of, I was too far in it to gracefully back out of that. So I had to go to London. I felt I had to go to London, and I did. I booked a trip to London. I go see Michelle Schock play at South Bank, which is kind of like, I don't know, in my mind, kind of like Lincoln Center in New York, a fairly sophisticated gig. And I see her, and she's spectacular. She's absolutely mesmerizing. You cannot not think this woman is just a jewel. And I remember that we had me and Martin had another meeting on the outside terrace at South Bank, and he was talking about the parameters of a deal, and we were going back and forth when a bird overhead uh, relieved itself on Martin's
Oh my God.
uh, very sort of bald head. And Martin didn't miss a beat. He grabbed a napkin and he said, "Oh, Peter, it's a sign of good luck. I believe this deal is meant to be."
That's funny.
And um, and that's how she got signed, essentially.
You know,
Then, yeah, go on.
no, no.
Well, then she turned out to be not the the most user friendly of artists, but she and I got along pretty well. Um, I had the idea that this guy Pete Anderson, who was the producer of Dwight Yoakam at the time, would be a fantastic producer for Michelle. And I remember I set up a lunch, a breakfast or a lunch on a weekend, a brunch with Michelle and Pete to talk about the possibility. And when it was over, Pete said, "Oh, I love her. She's great." And Michelle took me aside and said, "I hate him. He's horrible."
Ooh,
But, but somehow I persuaded her to go ahead and try this thing with Pete, and the two of them together made an astounding album. Um, it doesn't get the kind of recognition it deserves. It did when it was released, and it did for some years afterwards. Um, it's called Short Sharp Shocked, and it's a brilliant record, um, and one that I'm proud of. Uh, and that's the story of signing Michelle.
well, it's like in these days, the Everly Brothers and Glenn Campbell are revered, where
Mm.
I think they were underappreciated when they tried to come back.
Well, okay, so I was involved with the Everly Brothers comeback back in 1984. They hadn't been together for 10 years. They broke up famously on stage um, in 74 or thereabouts. Uh, so we did a deal to release Everly Brothers records, and Dave Edmunds was hired to be the producer.
A good choice.
A very good choice. And Dave Edmunds is a tremendously talented guy and a sweetheart, by the way. Um, but you can't underestimate the power of the Everly Brothers and the um, incredibly deep and wide reverence that every other artist you ever encounter has for them. Uh, so it was in its way awe-inspiring to be handling the Everlys. In another way, it was difficult to be handling the Everly Brothers um, because their reputation was that they didn't get along or that they didn't agree on anything, and that turned out to be pretty much the case. Um, if one said this is up, the other would say you're crazy, this is down, and it's day outside. No, it's night outside. Nothing was ever. Uh, they were never in sync about anything, and one would only do things for the art, and the other would only do things for the money. So that rarely coincided. So everything was difficult with the air release, but it was still them. There's a very uh, funny story about Phil Everly told me this story. They came to town because Paul Simon wanted them to sing backgrounds on Graceland.
Ah,
Uh, and so they came to New York, and then Paul hosted a dinner party in his apartment on Central Park South. And the guests arrive, and the guests included Billy Joel, and it included Paul McCartney. So they all sit down to dinner, and Billy Joel is yapping and stammering and stuff. And finally, uh, he says, "Y'all have to forgive me. I mean, I'm sitting here at dinner, but you know, Paul McCartney's here, and it makes me very nervous to be saying things. I feel self-conscious, and I feel, you know, anxious." And Paul McCartney says, "Well, how do you think I feel? Those are the Everly Brothers." So it was like that, you know.
They have
Um,
so much reverence today, as like I said, Glenn Campbell, who he was just not appreciated in his time until the end came, and then people just were gushing over him.
well, he was certainly appreciated at a certain time, and he was always appreciated by other musicians. You know, he was a member of the Wrecking Crew,
Sure,
and he was a temporary Beach Boy when they needed somebody. Um, he was widely regarded, and he had a major national TV show um, for a few years, I think, right?
he did,
He, oh yeah, oh
but
yeah.
I
Can't remember if it was a what they would call a summer replacement show or if it was um, a regular year-round show. But yeah, on NBC, I think for years. But anyway, point is, you know, we don't have to pump up Glenn Campbell.
no,
Uh,
no, but I just feel years later people really appreciate him in an artistic way, where before they felt, he could have been like Johnny Mathis or appreciated worldwide, but not as respected as he should have been for his musicianship because of the TV show, maybe, which sold the records for him.
sure. Well, yeah, but so did the hits, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
uh,
But
yeah,
that's amazing. You got to work with the Everlys.
it was amazing. Um, and and that led to working with the Everlys, cutting a record with the Beach Boys, which looms large in my memory as one of the great events. Um, what happened was uh, IBM would every year have these seminars, and they would fly a couple of thousand employees, in this case to Florida, uh, and these employees would spend a week doing training and seminar or whatever, and team building. And at the end of the week, there'd be a party, and the party would feature entertainment. And this particular year, um, the entertainment altered week by week, either the Everly Brothers or the Beach Boys. So, because of this, Don Everly got it in his mind that he wanted to make a record with the Beach Boys. So he said to me, uh, "I want to do it, and it has to include Brian Wilson." Now, at the time, Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys could not have been more separate, and the two camps did not interact. They weren't on good terms. But it didn't matter to Don Everly. To him, it was like, this is what I want, go get it. Um, and so I had to set about getting the Everly Brothers and the Beach Boys and Brian Wilson together to make a record. Don chose the song Don't Worry, Baby. So while we were in Florida, we recorded the track, and the band was sensational. It was Albert Lee on guitar, a session guy, session keyboard player named Pete Wingfield, and Larry London, quite a renowned Nashville studio drummer, was the drummer. And so cutting the track, which we did in Fort Lauderdale, um, went well and came out well. So the next phase was to reconvene in California for the vocals. So there was a lot of negotiation between Jerry Weintraub, who was the manager of the Beach Boys, and Dr. Eugene Landy, legendarily the psychiatrist who was lording over Brian Wilson at the time. And it went back and forth until finally everyone agreed on the parameters of everybody working together to cut "Don't Worry, Baby" with the Everly Brothers. So the parameters included Brian could only appear on the intro to the song. No other Brian Wilson would be allowed per the Beach Boys. So, okay, no choice but to agree to that. And we scheduled this session where Brian would show up at noontime, and a couple of hours were allotted, and then the Beach Boys would show up later in the afternoon, and Brian would be gone, and the Beach Boys would be there, and everything ostensibly would go smoothly. And the middleman for a lot of this was Bruce Johnston from the Beach Boys, an extremely gracious and good-natured fellow who um, acted as the intermediary between the two camps.
He writes the songs.
That make the whole world sing. It's true. So the day comes, and I had imported Frank Filippetti, a very, very, very capable engineer, recording engineer, to do this with me. And we were in a studio in Encino, and Frank and I showed up, 2 hours early to set up the studio and be ready for the date. And the phone rings in the control room, and the receptionist says, "Peter, Brian is here." And I was distracted, and I said, "Brian who?" And she said, "Wilson. Brian Wilson is here." And he was an hour early at least. Okay. So I hang up the phone. I then call Bruce Johnston, who again was going to be the buffer between the Beach Boys and Brian. And Bruce lived in Calabasas, north of LA. And I said, "Bruce, Brian's here." And Bruce was, "What's he doing there? He's early." I said, I know he's early, but he's here. And Bruce said, "Okay, okay, just stall him. Stall him. I'm getting in my car. I'll be there as soon as I can." Okay. So I go out to reception, and sure enough, Brian is sitting there in a chair, and I introduce myself. I say, "Hi, Brian. My name's Peter. I'm running this session today, and uh, Brian, he stands up, and he's always sort of overamped. He talks too loud and this and that, you know, and he says, and he's carrying a little thermal bag, a little insulated bag, and it was a Super Bowl 25 commemorative satchel of some sort, and so I say, "Let's go back to the studio," and we go back, and he sits down, and now I'm, staring at Brian Wilson, and he's looking at me, and I need to stall for at least an hour.
Oh, wow.
And uh, Brian looks at me and he says, "Do you like sushi?" And I said, "Well, I like some sushi, California rolls and such." He said, uh, he said, "You gotta watch out for that wasabi, though. It gets all up your nose." I said, "I'll take that under advisement, Brian. Yeah." So, now I don't know what to do. I say, I think, "Hey, Brian, have you heard the track that we cut, for this?" And he says, "No, I haven't." I said, "Well, let me play it down for you," because in my mind I figure that's going to kill 3.5 minutes.
Yeah.
So, so we play him the track, and he gets quite excited. Now he's hopping up and down in his seat, and you know, he's motivated. Brian didn't come alone to this session. He was accompanied by a guy named Jeff. And Jeff was he was also kind of a bald-headed guy with glasses. And and I just assumed he was, you know, the aide or the handler or whatever. But what he was I came to realize later on that he's the guy that they called the surf Nazi. And what Jeff was there to do was to record all of Brian's moments, important moments during this episode. And he had a camera. He would take pictures of Brian every so often, and he would make notes about Brian's behaviors. And Brian is now getting quite agitated, and Jeff is starting to take pictures and make notes. And Brian says, "Well, I can go out there and I can sing, you know." And I said, "Okay, yeah, what about maybe we just start. Let's try the introduction, you know, because that's as far as we're supposed to go." Brian says, "Yeah, okay, let's do that. Let's do that." He goes out in the studio and he warms up for a couple of takes. And after he's got his voice together, or to the extent it's going to get together, I say, "Okay, well, why don't we try one?" Yeah, let's try one. Let's try one. And he sings the introduction, which is, basically his falsetto voice, and he's going, wow, wow, ooh, like that. Okay, it didn't take him, maybe it took him two or three tries before he decided, that's a good take. And so he says, "Okay, let's go to the chorus. Let's go to the chorus." Now, I'm not supposed to go to the chorus, but, nobody else is there. Bruce isn't there. And Brian is asking me to go to the chorus. And I don't have the heart to say no. And so I say to Frank, "Well, let's go to the chorus." We go there, and he starts working on, his harmony part in the chorus. And when he's satisfied, I figure I'm going to bring him back in the room and play it for him, and he'll be done.
Right.
He says, "Give me another track. Give me another track." And he's jumping up and down, and he's really into it. And I can't say no. I say, "Okay, here you go." And he sings a second harmony part. And when he's done, he says, "Give me another track. I want another track."
Another track on the same vocal or going
On the chorus of on the first chorus of the song. So he does a third harmony. And then he says, "Okay, hold it." And he stops moving, and he's got his finger in the air, and nothing's happening. He's just stock still. And it lasted for a while. I mean, 30 seconds of stock still is long. This could have been a minute. Frank and I were looking at each other like, what's gone wrong? have we have we blown out Brian Wilson? What's going on here? And all of a sudden he says, "Okay, roll it," like that, And we press record, and he sings a fourth harmony part. But this time, the way everything is now weaving in between one another, it's fantastic. Okay, it's not exactly "Don't Worry, Baby," but it's not "Don't Worry, Baby," but it's really something.
and
Frank actually,
his
yeah,
strange period with Landry, which
yes,
I'm finding amazing that he's that good
yeah,
at that point in time.
I couldn't agree with you more. So Frank even looked at me while this was going on, and he said, "Do you believe this? I said, yeah, this is great, you know. While I think maybe just as this was ending and he was getting this the way he wanted it, that's when Bruce Johnston walked in. So we kind of got caught, you know, with our hand in the cookie jar, so to speak. And Bruce Johnston, uh, he came over to take a seat next to me at the console, and he leans over and he says to me, "You're going to be in charge of this record from start to finish, right?" And I said, "Yeah, yeah." And he said, "So that will never be heard, right?" And I said, "Right, Bruce. It'll never be heard." Because that was the deal, you know, only official harmonies by the official Beach Boys, you know, were permitted. And so we didn't get to use that stuff. Um, by the way, for your viewers, uh, if you want to hear the best version of the Beach Boys and the Everlys doing "Don't Worry, Baby," you can find that on the Tequila Sunrise soundtrack album,
Oh, truly.
which is the mix that Frank and I did together instead of the one that the Everlys themselves supervised, um, which is also out there and available, but go with the Tequila Sunrise version. It's much better.
Ah, interesting. Now, were the Everlys on it when Brian was singing?
No, no. Um, and the other strange part was that so when the chorus was finished, I said, "So Brian, you want to come in and listen?" And he came in and I played it back for him. And he was so excited. And he said, "Okay, okay, okay. This is great. I'll go out and do the rest of the choruses." You know, and I thought to say to him, you know, and this is the guy who hand stitched together Good Vibrations and Heroes and Villains. You know, I thought to say to him, no, no, Brian, you don't understand. If you're happy with that chorus, we can just fly it into the other choruses.
Nice
So
thing to say.
you
Right.
don't actually have to sing it anymore. And then he reverted again to the other Brian. He said he said then I'm done. I'm done. I did it. I did it. And he started jumping up and down, saying to himself, "I did it. I did it." You know, like that. That was something. Shortly after that, the Surf Nazi came and he said, "Dr. Landy would like to speak to you. He's on the phone in the lounge." So I went out to the lounge and picked up the phone. But the thing was that Brian was standing right next to me. And Dr. Landy started saying, "So, Peter, how was Brian today?" So, okay, I said, "Oh, he was fantastic. Everything went great, smooth as could be. We got what we needed, and Brian was really on his game, you know." And then Dr. Landy would say, "No, no, but I mean emotionally. Did he seem anxious to you?" You know, and he started quizzing me with Brian right there, you know, trying to get me to say things that would, I don't know, provide insight to Brian or whatever his game was. I really didn't appreciate the position that he put me in, and it was very intentional. Um, and so that's I guess a glimpse into what Brian was living through at the time, you know.
Which is quite sad because he's so important. And you got to be with the Everlys, Paul Simon, Paul McCartney, Brian Wilson.
Well, I didn't get invited to that dinner party, so
Oh, I thought you were.
I only heard about it the next morning.
Oh, sorry. But
Yeah,
still,
I'm sorry too.
You're with the Everlys and Brian Wilson, and you just feel, wow, I'm really gifted to be able to be with these essential people.
No question. No question at all. It was like I was certainly living the career I always aimed to try to have, and it was unfolding in ways that were even better than I could have anticipated. I was Paul McCartney's publicist for one album.
Oh, really? For 1 hour?
For one album.
Oh, one album.
Yeah, called Back to the Egg, which was his first album for Columbia Records. When I was in the publicity department of Columbia, I got assigned to do that.
You got them the Grammy.
No, I don't think so. But I did get him some press.
Back to the Egg won the Grammy.
I don't think it did. No.
No, the first for Columbia, I'm pretty sure because Steve Hawley is a dear friend of mine.
Right. Oh yeah, we've discussed this. Yeah.
Yeah, Steve,
Um,
a dear friend of mine. I'm going to look it up on Google um, because I know Steve got a Grammy, and I think Back to the Egg was it.
wow.
But do you know Bruce Dickinson?
Yeah,
Not
sure.
from Iron Maiden, but the A&R guy.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
So Bruce is an old dear friend. He used to buy our records at not only mine but John Macy's at the Harvard Coop, which is now
Uh,
Barnes and Noble.
uh,
So that's how I met Brian. So he took Jimmy Miller and I to lunch because he wanted to take Jimmy to lunch, and
why not? Right.
he was telling us about the sales of the McCartney albums on Columbia and how you know that whole deal came out. But
Hmm.
I am in my Google trying to see Back to the Egg. It doesn't want to play ball. All right.
Okay.
Anyway, that's great. You did Back to the Egg. Jimmy
Yeah,
Page,
well,
right?
what's that?
Jimmy Page was on that album.
Well, they had that cut called Rockestra, which had everybody and their brother on it. Although maybe not Jimmy Page, Dave Gilmore, yeah. Uh, I don't know. At any rate,
What else did you do in Columbia?
did I do?
Yeah, you did publicity. So for Columbia,
Yeah, I had some acts. Toto at one point, Steve Stills. Um, I I can't really conjure. Oh, Paul Collins, The Beat. Uh, I can't really conjure any of the others at the moment.
so when did the Columbia years come in?
That was just 1979 to 1980.
Ah,
Long time ago. Huh?
yeah. I mean, it's amazing that it just feels like yesterday when all these things happened.
Well, it was a while back, Joe.
I know it's like 70 is the new 30. I say. Did
Hmm.
you work with Paul? Did an MPL?
No, not really. But I did get him uh, quite a press break. Oh gosh, you really want to hear these old stories?
I love him. I,
I think we discussed this already. Um, Paul McCartney on the Tomorrow Show with Tom Snyder for an
no,
hour.
we didn't talk about that. No.
Really? Well, I had a contact at NBC who was suddenly, I think, the a producer for the Tomorrow Show with Tom Snyder. Whether people can remember that show or not, um, but uh, so we were promoting "Wonderful Christmas Time" by McCartney,
Yeah, great song.
and I had this notion of Paul, appearing on the Tomorrow Show at Christmas time in sort of a happy Christmas kind of way or something. At the time, Paul was rehearsing in London and he couldn't be in New York. And so I had to convince NBC to hire a satellite to set up a two-way conversation between Paul and Tom Snyder in New York. And back in those days, satellite time was incredibly rare and incredibly expensive. So it took some doing, but I managed to convince NBC that this was a worthwhile thing to do. So Paul had an hour on the Tomorrow Show in 1970, Christmas 79. Um, and uh, I was supposed to get the nod to go to London to handle the London side of the broadcast. So that would have been some hanging out with Paul. But the department head decided that it really should fall to her to be in London to anchor that end of the broadcast. So I got bested, and I ended up in the New York studio while she was having fun in London with Paulie.
Well, we're going to congratulate you right now because you were the publicist on a Grammy-winning single,
What's single?
Rochester Theme. Sir Paul did a Grammy for
Best
Rochester's
rock instrumental, right?
Best Rock Instrumental Performance.
Yeah, now I remember. You've jogged my memory.
So
Yeah.
Lubin gets the Grammy for Paul. That's the way we see it.
Okay. All right, I'll take that headline. Sure.
You're the publicist on the record, so yeah, I knew Steve Holly had a Grammy, and I
There
guess
you
that's what it was for.
Yeah, I think John Bonham might be on that recording too, though.
Really?
No, no, no offense to Steve Holly, but I'm pretty sure Bonham's also on
Do you know George Skabidas? Or did you know? George is
it.
gone. Dear friend of mine at Warner Brothers. So George puts me on the guest list for Lou Reed because he knows how much I love Lou. And I'd met Lou, but I'm going to meet him again. And I brought
Hmm.
JoJo Lane, Danny Lane's ex-wife from Wings. That's
Yeah.
how I met Steve through her and Jimmy Miller.
Hmm.
So we're going down the stairs, and Tracy Bonham is next to me. So I thought there's Lou Reed and his entourage, and we're coming down the stairs, and I'm with JoJo and Tracy Bonham. And I said, JoJo, have you met Tracy Bonham? And she grabs her. I knew your dad. Tracy played along. It was great. And then she runs up to Lou Reed. Do you still have your dogs? And Lou goes, yes.
Uh-huh.
He had the thin white, the Duke and the Count. For Count Basie and Duke Ellington. The dogs probably were long gone, but Lou said, yeah, I've still got
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
really funny night because JoJo was drunk. I can levelingly say that she was celebrating, and we had fun at Lou Reed that night.
Hmm.
Anyways, that's my John Bonham, Tracy Bonham story.
Right. And I'm sure it's not the only time Tracy Bonham was accosted by someone who knew her dad, you know.
Yeah,
So
but, it's rock and roll. How many people are named Bonham? It's not a.
I couldn't answer that one for you, Joe.
So we're at 2:52. We're doing good, Peter. Only got a few minutes left. As the Oracle says in the Matrix, our time is almost up.
Uh-huh. Okay.
But these are great stories. Any more fun publicity at Columbia?
Fun publicity? No, publicity was never fun.
Oh, it's fun for me, man. It's like, I got to do Mick Taylor's Stranger in This Town album. Put him at
Oh.
the Hard Rock Cafe.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Mick is just such a great guy. He was on Elliot Murphy's record too. And,
The newest one?
no, way back when.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Elliot's had everyone play with him.
Yeah.
David Johansen, and on and on. So we were label mates, Elliot and I. I was
Uh-huh.
the first album artist signed to the French label, which was called Flamingo. It was distributed by Carrere, Phyllis Nelson and Saxon.
Uh-huh.
It became New Rose, and then Elliot Murphy moved to Paris, where he's got a nice life.
I'm pleased for him. That's great.
He goes to the gym every day. His wife's a good chef, and he's happy. And his son does the recording for him. And he has
Well,
a huge fan base. So God bless him.
yeah, sounds like he has a shot at living forever, you know.
Yeah, I'm impressed. And he was just really fun to talk to, which we like. as you are. This is a great interview. So anything comes to mind that you want to talk about for your fan base out there, which you have. You have a fan base.
From my fan base. Um, uh, what topics have we not covered? Joe, I don't know,
We didn't cover the end of the A&R career. Um, so what did you conclude with? What artists?
toward the end of it. A group you also may not be. I don't know if you're familiar or not. There was a group called the Refreshments that I
No,
was.
don't know them.
Uh-huh. I was proud of them. Um, you probably have heard them though if you've ever watched the cartoon TV amusement King of the Hill. Were you a King of the Hill fan?
No,
Ah,
I'm a cartoon fan. I don't like animation. Uh, it just I'm into acting and scripting, and I study the old Perry Mason shows.
mhm.
I just think they're so well written, and Raymond Burr is so amazing, and Barbara Hale that I just
Well, the golden age of television writing for sure.
yeah, it was Earl Stanley Garden. The thing about Perry Mason was it was written in Malden. That's where Earl Stanley Garda, just 2 towns away, 3 towns away.
Ah,
So Della Street was Dell Street. You just
oh,
and you'll hear there's some guy named Malden in the show, and it's like just a one-off. But like Earl Stanley Garda got his inspiration from that town.
you are a font of Perry Mason trivia. That's incredible.
I love it because I watched it with my grandma and grandpa.
Hmm.
Whenever night was on, I go upstairs. I must have been 5, 4 years old, 6, and grandma and grandpa are watching it, and that's it stays with you all these
Sure,
decades later. But the
sure.
refreshments, was there a demo?
Was there a demo for the refreshment? No, they had made an independent album. By then, I guess groups were more and more, issuing their own albums. There was an independent album, which um, at the time there was a A&R Scout that was based in the South, in Austin, Texas, I think. Ruth Richards was her name. And she sent me this disc and said she thought I really should listen to it, which I did. And what prompted me to stay interested in it was that, gosh, this is something I haven't recalled in a long time. I took the disc home over Christmas and it got quite a few plays, at home. Um, and so they were based in Phoenix, Arizona. Oh, I'm sorry that this thing is dinging occasionally. Um, they were based in Phoenix, Arizona. They're now a group called Roger Klein and the Peacemakers, by the way. Um, but at the time, they made this album called Fizzy Fuzzy Big and Buzzy, which is a kind of a takeoff on the Who's
Yeah,
Meaty Beady Big and Bouncy.
but Buzzy Linhart isn't on it.
No, no Buzzy Linhart, but the album really did extremely well. At the time, Billboard had a chart called Heat Seekers,
Yep.
which was for new acts. They went to number one on the Heat Seekers chart. And they had something of a radio hit called Banditos, the chorus of which was everybody knows the world is full of stupid people.
Hmm.
And it was at the time of Weezer and uh, those sorts of acts, and they hung in there with them. At any rate, um, that's something I did at Mercury Records after Elektra Records. Um, I also did, let's see, The Ocean Blue, and there was this guy named Ed Hamill. He called himself Hamill on Trial. That was a signing then. Um, you're asking about, the tail end of the A&Ring. And I can't tell you anymore.
Oh,
That's
and our time is up. So, Peter,
There you
thanks
go.
so much for being back on the air.
You're very welcome, Joe. I had a good time.
Great. And we'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
All right.
Good luck. God bless.
Thanks. Same.
Bye.